Imagine for a moment swallowing a ball of iron glowing red hot straight from the fire. You cannot swallow it down, you cannot spit it out. It simply sits there, lodged in you, impossible to ignore and impossible to resolve. That is not a threat, that is not a punishment. That is word for word the instruction a Zen master gave nearly 800 years ago for how to work with a single, ordinary word.
Hold it, he said, the way you would hold a red-hot iron ball you have swallowed and cannot spit out. Carry it with you day and night. Do not analyze it. Do not solve it. Just hold it until the holding changes you.
We are going to spend this long, quiet night together with that strange instruction and with the curious little objects it points to in the things called koans. And by the end, I hope the iron ball will feel less like something fearsome and more like something almost tender. A way of setting a racing mind down, not by forcing it quiet, but by giving it one impossible thing to chew on until it finally, gratefully, lets go. Welcome to Relaxing Subjects. There is nothing you need to do here, nothing to figure out, nowhere else to be, no test waiting at the end of this. You do not need to know anything about Zen to listen. You do not need to believe anything or remember anything or follow along carefully. If your mind drifts, that is fine. If you fall asleep before I am halfway through, that is the best outcome of all, and I will take it as a quiet compliment. The words will keep going softly in the dark, whether you are awake to meet them or not. If you would like, before you settle all the way down, you might leave a small note in the comments. Just what time it is where you are and the name of the place you are listening from. A city, a country, a little town nobody has heard of. There is something gentle about knowing that all over the world, in all these different hours, people are lying in the dark together, listening to the same quiet voice. You do not have to. It is only an invitation, a small thread between you and everyone else who found their way here tonight. And now, wherever you are, let yourself settle in. Take a slow, deep breath in. Let it fill you without effort, and let it go, slowly, all the way out, until your shoulders drop a little from wherever they have been holding themselves all day. You can feel the weight of your body against the bed, against the pillow, against whatever is holding you up right now. You do not have to hold yourself up anymore. The mattress is doing that. The earth underneath it is doing that. You can let it. Thank you for being here in this hour in the dark with me. Let us begin. I want to start by naming something very gently because I think it may be the very reason you are here. You lie down to sleep. The light goes out. The room goes quiet. And the moment everything around you finally goes still, that is exactly the moment your mind decides to start. It begins replaying the conversation from this afternoon. It begins composing the email you should have sent. It begins listing with terrible thoroughness every small thing you forgot, every worry you have not solved, every door left open somewhere in your life. The mind starts narrating and rehearsing and arguing and planning, and the harder you try to shut it off, the louder and faster it seems to run. You turn over. You try to think about nothing, and thinking about nothing turns out to be one more thing for the mind to chew on, one more loop to spin. I want you to hear this clearly, because it matters. There is nothing wrong with you. That racing mind, the one that switches on the instant the lights go off, that is not a personal flaw. It is not a sign that you are broken or anxious in some special and shameful way, or worse at resting than everyone else who falls asleep so easily. It is one of the oldest, most ordinary human experiences there is. People have been lying awake in the dark, minds spinning, for as long as there have been people in darkness. The monks we are going to talk about tonight knew this mind intimately. They had a whole, careful vocabulary for the way thought chases itself in circles. They were not strangers to the very thing keeping you up. In fact, the strange little practice they built was aimed, in part, at exactly this, at a mind that will not stop solving, will not stop turning, will not put itself down. So, you are in good company, the most ordinary company in the world, and tonight you do not have to fix that mind or fight it or win against it. We are going to do something much quieter. We are going to look slowly and with curiosity at a tool those old teachers made, or a tool with a peculiar and almost paradoxical design. And here is where I want to gently overturn the thing you have probably been told. If you have ever heard the word Koan, you have probably heard it described as a kind of riddle, a charming little brain teaser, a nonsensical puzzle that Zen masters murmur to confuse their students, something delightfully mysterious that has no real answer, meant only to twist your thoughts into pretty knots and leave you blinking. The sound of one hand clapping. You have surely heard that one. People recite it the way they recite a magic trick, as if its whole purpose is to be unsolvable and to make you feel pleasantly baffled. A bit of exotic decoration, a paradox to admire from a distance, and then set back on the shelf. I want to tell you as kindly as I can that this is almost exactly backwards, and the truth is far more interesting and far more useful to you tonight, lying here with a mind that will not be still. A koan is not a nonsense riddle. It is not a puzzle with a hidden, clever answer that smart people work out and slow people miss. It is something stranger and more deliberate than that. A koan is a precision instrument. It was engineered, and I mean that word, carefully engineered, designed on purpose, refined over centuries by people who knew exactly what they were doing, to make your thinking mind fail. Not by accident, by design. Every clever answer you bring to it is meant to be rejected. Every logical solution is built to collapse. It is a barrier constructed so that the part of you that solves things runs straight into a wall, again and again, until at last it gives up the running. And in that giving up, that is where the whole point lives. Sit with that for a moment, because it is the opposite of what most people think. The riddle, the ordinary riddle, exists to be solved. You hear it, you puzzle over it, and then comes the satisfying click of the answer, and the riddle is finished, used up, discarded. A koan does the reverse. It exists to defeat your solving. There is no satisfying click waiting for the clever. The harder your logical mind works on it, the more thoroughly the koan does its job, which is to exhaust that mind, to run it out of fuel, to bring it to the edge of a kind of impasse where thinking simply has nowhere left to go. And do you see already why this might matter to you tonight? Your racing mind is a solving mind. That is what keeps it running in the dark. It has a problem, tomorrow, or yesterday, or money, or someone's words, or your own choices. And it believes, the way it always believes, that if it just keeps turning the problem over, just keeps chewing, it will eventually crack it, and then it can rest. So it chews and chews. And the rest never comes, because the mind always finds one more angle, one more worry, one more thing to solve. The koan is a problem built so the solver cannot win. And something quite unexpected happens when the solving mind meets a problem it genuinely cannot solve. Not a hard problem, but an impossible one. After enough effort, it stops. It has to. And in that stopping, there is a quiet you cannot reach by trying to be quiet. But I am getting ahead of myself, and there is no hurry here, none at all. We have all night. Let us slow down and look at the word itself, because even the word tells you something the riddle version completely misses. Koan, that is the Japanese way of saying it, the way it has come to us in the West. But the word did not begin in Japan. It began in China centuries earlier as gongan, 2 characters. And here is the part that surprises almost everyone who hears it. Gong'an was not originally a spiritual word at all. It was a legal word, a word from the courts. Gong'an meant, quite literally, a public case, a public record. It was the language of magistrates, of judges, of the law. A Gong'an was a legal precedent, an official case on the public record, a matter that had been brought before the authorities and settled, written down, kept as a standard against which future cases could be measured. Let that sink in slowly, because it changes everything about how you hold the idea. When those old Chan teachers, Chan is simply the Chinese word that became Zen when it traveled to Japan, the same tradition, the same root. When those teachers borrowed this word for their strange teaching stories, they were making a deliberate and rather beautiful choice. They were saying, this is a case, like a case of law, a matter to be settled. Think of what that means. When a magistrate, an old Chinese judge, sat down with a case before him, he was not playing a game. He was not amusing himself with a clever riddle to pass the afternoon. He had a real matter in front of him, a real dispute, something that demanded a real resolution. He had to settle it, not cleverly, truly. His whole authority, his whole role, rested on actually settling the matter all the way down, leaving nothing unresolved. The case was not closed until it was genuinely closed. That is the metaphor hiding inside the word Koan. A Koan is a case the student must settle, the way a judge settles a matter of law. It is not a toy, it is not decoration. It is a real matter placed before you, demanding a real resolution. And the resolution it demands is not a clever verbal answer, the way a riddle wants an answer, but something deeper, something settled all the way through you, the way a judge's verdict settles a case and not before. Until you have truly settled it, the case stays open. It stays in front of you. You carry it. You cannot put it down by being clever, any more than a judge can dismiss a real case by telling a joke. This is why the iron ball makes sense. Remember the instruction. Hold the word the way you hold a red-hot iron ball you have swallowed and cannot spit out. A swallowed iron ball is not a riddle you solve and forget. It is a matter that stays with you continuously until it is genuinely resolved. You cannot ignore it. You cannot half attend to it. It is a case you must settle, lodged right in the center of you, demanding everything until it is truly, fully settled. And the master who gave that instruction was not being cruel or mysterious for its own sake. He was describing, as vividly as he could, what it feels like to carry a matter that cannot be resolved by the ordinary tricks of the thinking mind, and to keep carrying it anyway until something gives. So already, just from the word, you can feel the koan slipping free of the cliché. It is not a meaningless little paradox to make you go cross-eyed at a dinner party. It is a public case, a matter of law for the heart, a thing that must be settled, and that has been set up with great care and great craft, so that the only way to settle it is to exhaust every clever attempt and arrive, finally, somewhere the clever mind cannot go. I find there is something almost comforting in that lying here in the dark. Your racing mind, the one chewing on tomorrow, is also trying to settle a case. It is trying to resolve something. It just keeps reaching for the wrong tool. More thinking, more turning, more solving, and the case stays open because the tool does not fit. The old teachers understood this so well that they built a whole practice around a different kind of settling. A settling that comes not from more thought, but from thought finally running out and something quieter taking its place. Let us pause here for a moment. There is no rush to go on. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it go all the way out slowly, like a tide going back out to sea. Notice, if you can, that nothing in this hour requires anything of you. The case of your own night does not have to be settled tonight. You can simply let it sit there unsolved and let yourself rest beside it anyway. Notice how the body has grown a little heavier since we began, a little more held by the bed beneath you. There is nowhere you need to get to, and when you are ready, only when you are ready, we will continue together gently into the story of a master, a monk, and a single small word that broke the rules of its own scripture on purpose. Because that is where this practice gets its sharpest and most famous edge. There was once a Chinese master, a real man who lived a very long time ago, in the days of the Tang-dynasty, more than 1,000 years before either of us was born, and to him came a monk with a simple question. The kind of question that sounds at first as if it should have a plain and easy answer. The monk asked about a dog, about whether a dog, an ordinary dog, had something called Buddha nature, and the master answered with a single syllable that should have been impossible for him to say, a word that contradicted the very teaching he had given his life to. He looked at the monk, and to a question that the whole of his tradition had already answered one way, he said the other, he said no, and to understand why that one small word landed like a thunderclap, why it has echoed down through 8 centuries and become perhaps the single most worked with word in all of Zen, we have to understand what he was breaking and why a teacher would ever break his own scripture on purpose. We have to sit gently with a dog, a question, and the word no. But that is for the next part of our night together. For now, let the iron ball rest warm and harmless in your imagination, the case still open, the mind beginning just a little to slow. Let us begin then the way the old instruction begins, not with an explanation, but with an image. Imagine for a moment that someone has handed you something to hold, not in your hands, inside you. A small, round thing, swallowed and now resting somewhere beneath your ribs, and it is hot. Not painfully so, not in the way of this gentle hour, but warm, present, impossible to ignore and impossible to be rid of. You cannot spit it out, you cannot swallow it down and forget it. It simply stays, glowing quietly, asking nothing of you except that you carry it. That is the instruction. Those are very nearly the words a Chinese master named Wumen wrote down almost 800 years ago when he tried to explain how a person should hold a single word in the mind until something in them gives way. Make it, he said, a red-hot iron ball you have swallowed and cannot spit out. Carry it, day and night, until inside and outside become one. It is a strange thing to say to someone who only wanted to quiet their thoughts. And yet, as we will find, it may be one of the kindest instructions ever given to a restless mind. We will come back to it. Let it sit there for now, warm and harmless, while we settle in together. Welcome to Relaxing Subjects. Tonight we are going to slow down, you and I, and spend some time with one of the oldest and most curious tools the human mind ever made for quieting itself, the Zen Koan. We will take it slowly. There is no hurry here, and there is nothing for you to solve. You do not need to know anything about Zen to listen. You do not need to believe anything, remember anything, or do anything at all, except lie there and let the words move past you like water under a bridge. If some of it stays with you, good. If all of it drifts away by morning, that is good too. Either way, you will have rested. If you would like, before we go further, you might leave a small note somewhere in the comments, what time it is, where you are right now, and the name of the place you are listening from. There is something quietly lovely about it, all these people in all these different hours of the night, some just lying down, some halfway to sleep already, all of us held in the same small pool of lamplight for a little while. You do not have to, but the invitation is there. Now, take a slow, deep breath. Let it be a real one. In through the nose, a little slower than usual, and then let it go without forcing it. The way a held thing relaxes when you finally set it down. Feel the weight of your body where it meets the bed. Feel the places that are already heavy, already softening. Wherever you are, whatever today asked of you, let yourself settle in. There is nothing else to be done tonight. There is nowhere else to be. Thank you for being here. Let us begin. I want to start by naming something very gently because I suspect it is the reason a good many of you are awake right now, listening to a stranger's voice in the dark instead of sleeping. It is the mind, the way it will not stop. You lie down, you close your eyes, the room goes quiet. And that is precisely when it starts up, as if your stillness were a signal it had been waiting for all day. It reaches back into the afternoon and replays a conversation you would rather forget. It reaches forward into tomorrow and rehearses a thing that has not happened and may never happen. It circles, it loops. It picks up a worry, sets it down, picks it up again, turns it over, checks to see if it has changed. It has not changed. It picks it up once more. And here is the first thing I want you to hear tonight. And I want you to hear it without any judgment attached to it at all. That racing mind of yours is not a flaw. It is not a sign that something has gone wrong with you, or that you are doing rest incorrectly, or that you are somehow worse at being calm than the people who seem to fall asleep the moment their head touches the pillow. The mind that comes to you at night, restless and busy and unwilling to be still, that is one of the oldest human experiences there is. People have lain awake exactly like this for as long as there have been people and beds and quiet rooms. The monks we are about to meet knew this mind intimately. They named it. They studied it. They built whole practices around the simple, stubborn fact of it. You are not broken. You are awake in the most ordinary way a human being can be awake.
And you are not awake alone. So we have a restless mind, and we have, waiting for us in the dark, this strange old tool, the Koan, which is supposed to do something about it. And here is where I want to surprise you a little, because almost everything you may have heard about what a Koan is gently and completely wrong.
If you have encountered the idea of a koan at all, you have probably met it dressed up as a kind of charming nonsense, a riddle. A clever little paradox, a wise man in robes offers up with a knowing smile, something to make you tilt your head and say, "How mysterious." Something whose whole purpose is to sound deep and go nowhere. The sound of one hand clapping. What was your face before your parents were born? We tend to file these away somewhere near fortune cookies and posters on dormitory walls. Pleasant, baffling, ultimately decorative. Something to admire and then set down. But that is the opposite of what a koan actually is. And the truth is far stranger and far more useful to a person lying awake at night. A koan is not a riddle with a hidden clever answer waiting to be guessed. A riddle, after all, has a solution. There is a trick to it, a single right reply, and once a sharp enough mind finds the trick, the riddle is solved and over, used up, never to puzzle you again. A koan is built on exactly the opposite principle. A koan is designed, deliberately, precisely, by people who understood the mind very well, so that every clever answer you bring to it fails, so that the thinking mind, the part of you that solves things, that loves to solve things, that is at this very moment lying in your bed trying to solve tomorrow, runs at the koan again and again, and is turned away again and again until it finally exhausts itself and falls quiet. It is not a puzzle, it is a precision instrument, and the thing it is engineered to do is to make your thinking mind fail, not to humiliate it, not to trick it for sport, but to bring it kindly and inexorably to the edge of its own usefulness, to the place where the relentless machinery of problem-solving simply has nothing left to grip. The discomfort you feel when you cannot solve a thing, that very discomfort is not a side effect of the Koan. It is the Koan working. Sit with that for a moment because it turns the whole picture inside out. We usually imagine that the way to quiet a racing mind is to give it peace, to soothe it, to talk it down like a frightened animal. And there is a place for that, but the Koan does something almost the reverse. It hands the racing mind a problem and then makes absolutely certain the mind can never win. It lets the mind run until the running has no more fuel. And when the running stops, what is left in the silence after is the very stillness you were chasing all along. We will come back again and again tonight to how that actually works and to what it might feel like for you. But first I want to give you the word itself, because the word is a small key and it tells you nearly everything if you hold it the right way. The word is Koan. It is a Japanese word, the way it usually comes to us, but it did not begin in Japan. It began in China centuries earlier as a word read aloud as gongan. And here is the part that surprises almost everyone who learns it. Gongan was not originally a spiritual word at all. It was a legal one. It came from the language of the courts, the language of magistrates and law. Gongan meant, quite literally, a public case, a public record. The kind of document a judge would keep, a matter that had been brought before the law, weighed and settled so that it stood afterward as a precedent, a case on the books that all later cases would have to measure themselves against. Think of what that means for a moment. The people who began calling these strange exchanges koans were not thinking of riddles or poems or pretty mysteries. They were thinking of law. They were borrowing the gravity of a courtroom. A koan, in this older and truer sense, is a case that must be settled. Settled the way a magistrate settles a question of law, with the whole weight of the matter resting on the answer, nothing decorative about it, nothing optional. It is not a thing you admire. It is a thing you are required to resolve. You stand before it the way a person stands before the bench, and you cannot leave the room until the case is closed.
And what is being judged in that quiet inner courtroom is not your cleverness. We will come to who the judge is and how he knows whether you have truly settled the case or only talked your way around it. And you will find, I think, that it is far stranger and far more demanding than any examiner you have ever sat before, but that too is for later in our night.
For now, simply hold the shape of it, a racing mind that is not your fault and not yours alone, a tool that quiets it not by soothing it, but by handing it a case it cannot close, and letting it run itself still. And a word koan that secretly means a matter brought before the law, a public case awaiting its verdict. Let us pause here for a little while. There is no need to do anything with what you have heard. You do not have to understand it or agree with it or even keep hold of it. Take a slow, deep breath, the same as before, and let it out slowly. Notice the quiet in the room around you and the quiet that may have begun, just slightly, to gather in you. Notice how the body has grown a little heavier against the bed while we have been talking. There is the warm iron ball still resting where you left it, glowing low, asking nothing. There is the case still open, and there is no hurry at all to close it tonight. When you are ready, only when you are ready, we will go on together, gently, to meet the master and the monk and the dog and the single small word that broke the rules of its own scripture on purpose. There is a monastery somewhere in the north of Tang-dynasty China. The year, if we are measuring by the calendar, the West would later impose on those centuries, falls somewhere in the middle of the 9th. The halls are swept before dawn. A monk bows and approaches an old teacher in a corridor or a courtyard or some unremarkable patch of ground between one task and another, and he asks the question that every student of that tradition asked, sooner or later in one form or another, the question that is really just a way of asking, is there any hope for something like me? The question, in its formal shape, goes like this: does a dog have Buddha nature? The teacher's name is Zhaozhou Kongshen. The Japanese tradition will later call him Joshu. He was born, according to the records, in the year 778, and he lived an extraordinarily long life, well into his 90s, possibly longer. In a time when most lives were short and hard, he had been practicing and studying for decades by the time this particular monk came to him. He knew the scriptures, he knew the doctrines, he knew what the answer was supposed to be, and he said, Mu, that is the whole exchange in one form, a question and a single syllable. Mu. The Japanese reading of the Chinese character Wu, written Wu, a word that means no or not, or nothing or perhaps, because Chinese is dense and resistant to neat translation, something closer to the absence of the thing you are asking about. It is a small word, one breath, and it broke the rules of its own tradition on purpose. Let me stay here for a moment because the breaking is the whole point, and it is worth understanding exactly what was broken. In the Mahayana branch of Buddhism, which had by Zhaozhou's time become the dominant form in China and would later shape all of East Asian Buddhist thought, there is a teaching called Buddha nature. The Sanskrit name for it is Tathagatagarbha, and if you let that word settle in your ear, rather than trying to parse it, it carries a sense of something like the womb or the seed of awakening, the thing that is already present inside every being, already capable of flowering into what the Buddha himself flowered into. The Chinese term for it is foxing, and the doctrine is not subtle or ambiguous on the key point. It teaches that all sentient beings possess this nature. Not most beings, not good beings or disciplined beings or enlightened beings. All dogs, insects, you, every creature that breathes and moves and perceives is, according to this doctrine, already carrying within itself the complete and undiminished capacity for full awakening. This was not a minor footnote in the tradition. It was settled scripture. It was the kind of thing a well-trained monk would have known from early in his studies, the kind of thing Zhaozhou himself would have taught. To say that a dog has Buddha nature is simply to state what the Mahayana teaching holds. The expected answer, the correct answer by doctrine, is yes, of course it does. Everything does. And the old master, who had been studying this teaching for most of a century, looked at the monk and said, no, not yes, no, woo, moo. Now if you are the kind of person whose mind runs quickly, and since you are here in the middle of the night listening to this, I suspect you are exactly that kind of person. You may have already begun assembling possible explanations. Perhaps Zhaozhou was testing whether the monk would simply parrot back the official doctrine. Perhaps he meant something philosophical by it, some higher order negation, some Zen paradox where the no encompasses the yes. Perhaps he was pointing to something beyond the categories of yes and no altogether. These are all reasonable guesses. They are the kinds of things a clever, well-read, quick-moving mind reaches for. And they are all, within the tradition, the wrong kind of reaching. Not because they are obviously false. Some of them may even gesture toward something real, but because they are all ways of keeping the thinking mind in charge. They are ways of solving the Koan the way you would solve a logic puzzle or a philosophy exam, with concepts piling onto concepts until the question is buried under the weight of your cleverness. And that, precisely, is what Zhaozhou's single syllable was designed to stop. A koan is not a riddle. This is the most important thing I will say tonight, and it is worth staying with. A riddle, the kind you might have been given as a child, the kind that makes you groan and then grin when the answer is revealed, has a hidden, clever answer that can be stated plainly once you figure it out. The appeal of a riddle is the click of recognition when the solution is revealed, the satisfied sense of having decoded something. The riddle's purpose is to be solved, and once it is solved, it is over. A koan is built on the opposite principle. It is constructed so that every conceptual answer, every answer the thinking mind can produce, fails. Not just some answers, all of them. This is not an accident, and it is not a flaw in the design. It is the design. The koan is engineered so that the mind's normal problem-solving process, the process of gathering information, forming hypotheses, testing them against logic, and arriving at a conclusion, runs all the way to the end of its own rope, and then runs some more, and then when there is no more rope, something else is required. What that something else is, we will come to it. But stay for a moment with the image of the rope running out, because it is useful. You lie awake at night, and the mind loops. It returns to a conversation, a decision, a fear, something unresolved from the day or from years ago, and it works it and works it, as if by working it hard enough the answer will come, the relief will come, the situation will finally be settled. And the looping continues because the mind is very good at generating the next thought, and the thought after that, and it has been rewarded all your life for finding solutions, for being quick, for connecting one thing to another and arriving somewhere useful. The koan gives this mind something real to work on. It is not asking the mind to stop, which the mind cannot do on command. Try telling your mind to stop, and you will have the most vivid demonstration of the impossibility. Instead, it gives the mind a genuine problem to bite. Does a dog have Buddha nature? It seems like a question with an answer. It has a structure that resembles a question with an answer. The mind reaches in and finds a single syllable. No, not no. The negation of the thing the doctrine says is everywhere. And if you try to reason your way past it, if you build arguments and counter-arguments, if you decide that mu means something cleverly beyond mu, you arrive at a place you can almost stand on, and the ground dissolves because the master is still waiting, and he is not waiting for your theory about what mu might mean. There is a small but important wrinkle in the history of this exchange, and I mention it because it is the kind of thing that an honest account of the tradition should not smooth over. If you go looking through the larger record of Zhaozhou's sayings, the collected transcripts and dialogues preserved by his community and compiled over time, you will find that Zhaozhou did not always answer this same question with mu. On at least one other occasion recorded in the same corpus of texts, he answered the same question. Does a dog have Buddha nature? With the opposite word, yes. And he gave reasons for that answer, as he gave reasons for the other. He was an old teacher, and he met each student where that student was, and sometimes the needful thing was yes, and sometimes it was no. The Wumenguan, the collection that Wumen Huikai compiled in 1228, the collection we have been calling, in its English rendering, the Gateless Barrier or the Gateless Gate, made a deliberate choice. Wumen had all of Zhaozhou's exchanges available to him. He chose the mu version, only mu. And he placed it first as case 1, the gate through which every student who trains with the Wumenguan must first pass. Why? Because mu, with its blunt contradiction of doctrine, its flat refusal to give the expected answer, its resistance to any clever reframing, mu is the better instrument, not a better philosophical truth necessarily, a better tool. Wumen was making a curriculum, not an encyclopedia. He was selecting the exchange that would do the most work on the student's mind, and he judged that the inexplicable no was more powerful than the explicable yes. This is itself a small koan. A compiler sitting with every word his teacher's teacher's teacher ever spoke, deliberately choosing the most troubling one and putting it at the front of the book, saying, "Start here," before anything else, before the 47 cases that follow, before any ideas you might form about what Zen is or what enlightenment means. Start with this. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Moo. And somewhere in that choice, if you let it rest in you, rather than explain it, there is already something that feels like relief, because the tradition is not asking you to have the right idea about Buddha nature. It is not asking you to understand the philosophical landscape or to hold the correct position. It is giving you one syllable and saying, hold this, just this, not your theory about this, not your analysis of this, this. Take a slow, deep breath. There is nothing you need to figure out right now, nothing to settle, nothing to resolve, nothing that needs your reasoning to hold it together. Let the breath come in and let it go out, and let the mind rest, however briefly, on the single syllable that means not anything in particular. Mu. The word that dissolves the question without answering it. Let it be a small warm stone in the hand, not hot yet, not yet the iron ball we will come to, just present, just there, just waiting with you in the dark. And when you are ready, we will go on. Wumen himself, writing his commentary on Case 1, did not soften what he was prescribing. He was a Chan master in the southern Song dynasty, trained in the demanding style of his lineage, and his instructions for working with Mu are among the most vivid and uncompromising in all of Chan literature. He tells the student, concentrate your whole body into this one word, not your mind, your whole body, 360 bones and joints, 84,000 pores, every last fragment of the physical you, pour all of it into Mu, hold it day and night. Do not slip into the view that Mu is nothingness. Do not fall into the idea that it is a yes or no question after all. Just hold it. Uninterrupted, unceasingly. And then, this is the image that has stayed with practitioners across 8 centuries. He says, make it like a red-hot iron ball you have swallowed. You cannot swallow it further. You cannot spit it out. There it sits, in your chest, in your throat, demanding something, burning steadily, unable to be digested and unable to be expelled. If you have ever spent a night with a thought you could not resolve, a worry you could not set down, an argument you kept returning to, a fear that refused to be reasoned away, then you know in a very ordinary human way what Wumen is describing. That sensation of something lodged in you that you cannot work free. The difference the tradition proposes is this, that in the case of Mu, being unable to spit it out is not a problem to be escaped, it is the practice. You do not try to be free of the iron ball, you hold it, you carry it into your daily tasks, into your walking and eating and washing, you bring it to sleep, you wake with it, and you stay with it, not because it is comfortable, but because it is the only thing that, when it finally moves something real. Now, I want to be careful here because the tradition makes very large claims about what happens when the iron ball finally breaks. And some of those claims are the kind that require a lifetime of practice and a master to guide you. And none of them belong in a bedroom at 2 in the morning as simple instructions. But the mechanism that makes this useful, even tonight, even without a lineage or a teacher or a monastery, that mechanism is worth understanding, and it is something Zhaozhou's great successor in method, the 18th century Japanese master Hakuin Ekaku, named very cleanly. Hakuin was born in 1686 in Japan in a village near Mount Fuji. He became, over the course of a long and extraordinarily productive life, he died in 1768, the person most responsible for reviving and systematizing the practice of Koan training in Japan. When Rinzai Zen in Japan had grown diffuse and the Koan curriculum had fallen into a kind of formalism, Hakuin reordered and deepened it. Virtually every Rinzai teacher practicing today traces their line of transmission back to Hakuin, and Hakuin gave us what is perhaps the most useful single sentence for understanding why Koan practice works. He wrote in various forms throughout his letters and teaching records: great doubt, great awakening; small doubt, small awakening; no doubt, no awakening. Read that again slowly, if you can let the words land without immediately interpreting them. Great doubt, great awakening; no doubt, no awakening. The thing the racing mind tries to escape every night is exactly doubt, uncertainty, the unresolved question, the case that cannot be closed. Every loop the mind runs is an attempt to convert doubt into certainty, to arrive at the answer that will finally permit rest. And the mind believes, because it has been rewarded for this strategy in so many other situations, that more thinking will do it. Another circuit of the argument, another visit to the fear, another angle on the problem. Sooner or later, something will give. What Hakuin is saying, and this is the turn at the center of the whole method, is that doubt is not the obstacle. Doubt is the door. The great doubt he describes is not the anxious, spinning doubt of a mind trying to escape its own unease. It is a concentrated, held, sustained uncertainty, gathered into a single point, like fire gathered through a lens. And when that doubt reaches its full intensity, when the mind has pursued the koan to the absolute end of its capacity and found nothing to grip, nothing to rest on, nothing that holds, that is the moment the tradition calls impasse. And it is in impasse, not in resolution, that something shifts. He called the accumulated doubt yi tuan in the Chinese that still threaded through Japanese Zen practice, the doubt mass, the great ball of doubt. The image is physical and deliberate. It is not scattered anxiety, flickering from topic to topic. It is one thing gathered together, dense, held in one place, the way a fist is held together, the way an iron ball holds its heat. For tonight, for this hour, in this bed, with whatever the mind has been carrying, the most practical version of this is very simple. The mind wants to run. The mind wants to circle, to solve, to arrive somewhere. The koan says, run here. Circle this one thing, try to solve this, and the thing it offers cannot be solved, so the running gradually runs into itself, and the circling finds no new territory, and the solving runs out of angles. And in that narrowing, gradually, sometimes very slowly, sometimes not tonight, but some other night, the noise becomes one quiet thing. It will not happen by your trying to make it happen. That is the trap the tradition warns against most consistently. You do not force the iron ball to cool. You do not manufacture the impasse. You hold the koan, and the koan does what it does. And you allow that process rather than steering it. Which brings us back to the monk standing before Zhaozhou, still holding that single syllable. What could he say? He could say, I understand now that the no is not really a no, it is a no that points beyond the categories of yes and no. Zhaozhou would likely look at him and wait, or ask another question, something completely unrelated, something like, have you eaten? And the monk, caught off guard, would say yes, and Zhaozhou would say, then wash your bowl. And the monk would either understand or he would not. But he would not be allowed to stay in the comfortable territory of his interpretation, because interpretations are still thoughts about the koan. And thoughts about the koan are not the koan. This is the distinction that makes koan practice unlike anything else in the intellectual life of the West. In most traditions of learning, understanding is the goal. You study, you form a comprehension, you can explain what you have understood, and the explanation is the proof that you have arrived. Koan practice operates on a different axis entirely. You can explain mu beautifully, its etymology, its philosophical implications, its place in the history of Chan literature. And all of that explanation is precisely beside the point. The explanation is the consolation prize the thinking mind gives itself when it has failed to do the one thing being asked of it. What is being asked is not explainable. This is why the tradition talks about demonstration rather than explanation, about showing rather than saying, about a response that comes from somewhere other than the part of you that assembles sentences. The master does not want your theory about Mu. He wants to know whether you have, as the records sometimes put it, fallen into Mu, whether you have become the question rather than holding it at arm's length, whether the iron ball has, in some sense, become you or you it, so that there is no longer a distance between the one who is holding the doubt and the doubt itself. And here is what I find quietly remarkable about all of this lying in the dark together. The thing the tradition is describing, the closing of the distance between the thinker and the thought, the disappearance of the one who is worried and the worry itself into a single, undivided experience, is also what happens in ordinary everyday life when you are completely absorbed in something. When you are so deep in a task that you forget to check the time, forget to be hungry, forget the conversation you were planning in your head. In that absorption, the mind is not exactly quiet in the sense of being empty, but it is undivided. It is all in one place. The loop cannot run because there is no space between you and what you are doing for the loop to operate in. The Koan creates that undividedness through a strange and demanding route. By giving the mind something it cannot leave, something so stuck and so unresolvable that eventually the distance between the worrier and the worry closes not through resolution, but through sheer saturation. And in that closed distance, even for a moment, the racing stops. Not because the race is won, because there is no longer a track. The mind that loops tonight, the mind that revisits and re-examines and runs the argument one more time, that mind is very skilled at its own game. It moves fast, it is creative, it finds new angles on old material. The Koan is offered to that exact mind as a gift that looks like an obstacle. Here, it says, work on this, and the mind, being what it is, works on it and works on it and works on it. And eventually, in the ideal case, in the fully developed practice, the mind realizes, not conceptually but in some more fundamental way, that it does not have the kind of tool that can touch this. And in that moment of recognizing its own limit, something releases. Wumen, in the verse he wrote to accompany case 1, because each case in the Wumenguan has both a prose commentary and a short verse, another layer of the same impossible instruction, wrote something that can be translated roughly and imperfectly as a dog's Buddha nature, the complete announcement of the truth of Dharma, even a moment of yes and no, and body and life are lost. He was describing the blade-edge quality of the question, the way staying in the conceptual frame of yes and no is itself the falling away from whatever is real. The verse is not easy, it is not meant to be, but somewhere inside it, if you let it alone, there is the same shape as the iron ball, something you cannot comfortably hold and cannot put down. And Mu, in the end, is what the tradition calls the first case for a reason, not the only case, not the case that, if you crack it, makes you a master. The first gate. The one that asks you to walk up to the limit of what your ordinary mind can do and stay there without fleeing into an answer, without comforting yourself with an interpretation, without treating the discomfort of not knowing as a problem to be urgently solved, which is it not? A description of what it might mean to lie still with a thought that will not resolve and simply hold it and breathe and let the night be what the night is. There is a quality that starts to arrive sometimes when you have held one thing long enough without trying to escape it. A kind of heaviness that is not despair, but more like the heaviness of a stone settling into earth, becoming part of the ground rather than sitting restlessly on top of it. The monks who trained with Zhaozhou described staying with Mu through the day, through sleep, through eating and walking, carrying it the way you carry a stone in a coat pocket. Always there, always just slightly warm, reminding you that something is unresolved, something is waiting, something is held. The distinction the tradition makes very carefully, or when it is a distinction that matters, is between anxious carrying and concentrated carrying. The racing mind carries its worry anxiously, which means it picks it up and puts it down, and picks it up again, adds new material, removes and replaces, never quite holding it steadily, because the goal is always to be free of it, to arrive at the answer that allows the carrying to stop. The Koan is carried differently. You are not trying to stop carrying it. You are not waiting for the answer that will release you from the weight. The carrying itself is the practice. And in that shift, from trying to be done with the thing to simply being with it, something in the quality of attention changes. It does not change immediately. It does not change tonight, necessarily. But there is a version of this available even now, even without a teacher, even without years of zazen on a cushion. The noticing that some part of the mind's exhaustion comes from the trying to be done, from the endless effort of attempting to conclude, and that the effort can be, very quietly and without drama, set aside. Not the mu itself, just the effort to resolve the mu. Let it stay unresolved. Let the iron ball rest where it is. And let the breath do what it does, and let the body sink a little further into where it is resting, and let the question remain open. The open question, it turns out, is not so frightening when you stop reaching for its closing. Take a slow, deep breath now. In through the nose if that is comfortable. Hold it gently for just a moment. And then out, long and slow, letting the shoulders drop as the air goes. There is the word mu still there, not demanding anything, not requiring you to understand it or solve it or carry it anywhere, just there, the way a small flame is just there in a dark room, not lighting everything up, but present and warm and enough. The mind that loops at night is the same problem-solving mind that Zhaozhou's monk brought to the courtyard that morning. The same instrument, the same tendency, the same conviction that if it only runs the loop one more time, the answer will come and the night will settle. What Zhaozhou offered that monk, when what the tradition across 13 centuries has been offering, is not a better answer but a different kind of task. Not solve this, hold this, not arrive somewhere, stay here. And in the staying the body grows heavy. And in the heaviness the loop slows. And in the slowing there is sometimes, not always, not on command, not tonight, and maybe not for a long time, a moment when the mind releases its grip on the problem it has been carrying, and the problem simply exists like a dog sitting in a courtyard, like a word hanging in the air, like a question someone asked a long time ago that has not been answered, and somehow, just now, does not need to be. The monk left Zhaozhou's courtyard carrying mu. What he did with it, how many years he held it, what eventually shifted, whether what shifted was what the tradition would call kensho, or something quieter and less dramatic, but still real. The records do not tell us. The records give us the exchange itself and Wumen's commentary and the verse and nothing more. The monk's name is not preserved, only the question and the answer and the single syllable that is somehow both. And that perhaps is the right proportion. The teaching is the exchange, the practice is the holding. The person who holds it is, in some important sense, not the point, which may be, if you are lying in the dark right now with a very lively sense of your own personhood and all the thoughts that come with it, a slightly strange thing to hear. But stay with it for a moment. The part of you that loops is the part that is very sure it is you. Sure that these are your thoughts, your problems, your unresolved situations, your racing mind. What the tradition that gave us Mu is gesturing toward, very gently, and without asking you to believe anything, is that this certainty might be worth examining. Not tonight, not urgently, not as another task to accomplish before sleep, but as a possibility that Zhaozhou left open standing in a courtyard, offering a syllable that does not close the case but asks you, very quietly, to wonder who exactly is holding it. The monk asked, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" Zhaozhou said, "Mu." And somewhere in the space between the question and the answer, if you are willing to rest there rather than cross it, there is room for the mind to grow very still. There is a book that has no gate, or rather, and this is the thing worth sitting with as you settle deeper into where you are right now, it has a gate, and the gate has no door. It is called the Wumenguan. Wumen's barrier. Wumen's pass. In Japanese, it is the Momonkan, and in English, it is sometimes translated as the Gateless Gate, and sometimes as the Gateless Barrier. And both translations are correct, which is already its first teaching, before you have read a single word of it. The man who compiled it was Wumen Huikai, in Japanese, Wumen Huikai. He was a Chinese Chan master who lived from 1183 to 1260, and in the year 1228 he gathered 48 cases, 48 public records of exchanges between masters and students. 48 of these gongan, these settled precedents from the tradition, and he arranged them, and he added to each one a commentary and a capping verse, and he called the whole collection by this name that is itself a koan before you open the cover, 48, not 50. The number matters only because precision is a kind of respect for the text, for the tradition, for you. 48 cases, each one a gate. And the gate, Wumen tells us in his own preface, has no lock and no door. The Great Way, he writes, has no gate. 1,000 roads lead to it. So what exactly is the barrier? That is the question the book puts to you on the first page, and it does not answer it. The answering is your work. Take a slow breath here. You do not have to do any work tonight. You can simply let these words move through you like weather, landing where they land and drift past the rest. There is nothing to solve. There is nowhere you need to arrive before sleep comes. Just the sound of one voice in the quiet and 48 cases laid out in the dark like lanterns on a path. Let us stay with the image of the gate for a moment, because it is one of the most useful things in this collection, and it is right there in the name. Think of every problem-solving effort your mind makes as a kind of walking toward a door. There is an obstacle, there is something you need to get past, and the mind does what minds do. It looks for the latch, it tests the hinges, it checks the lock, it looks for a key, it looks for a window nearby, it considers whether the wall itself could be climbed. This is what problem-solving feels like from the inside. It is methodical, and it is energetic, and it is sometimes quite creative, and it is exhausting, and it almost never stops. Now imagine you approach a gate that has no door. There is a frame, there is a threshold, there is, unmistakably, a barrier. Something that says here and there, and you are on this side while the thing you want is on that side, but there is no lock because there is nothing to lock. There is no latch because there is nothing to lift. There is no key that fits because there is no keyhole. The mind walks up to this gate and begins its procedure, checks for the latch, finds nothing, checks for hinges, finds nothing, looks for a key? But what key? 1,000-year-old Chan master just looked at you with gentle eyes and said, "There is no door, and now your procedure has nowhere to go." That nowhere to go is exactly where Wumen wants you, because the gate with no door can, in fact, be passed. But not by the part of you that checks for latches, The part that checks for latches is precisely what the gate is built to stop, and when that part finally exhausts itself, runs out of procedure, stands at the gateless gate, and simply stands there, something else becomes possible, something that does not check for latches, something that is already on both sides of the gate at once and always was. This is the promise of the Wumenguan. It is not a promise of cleverness. It is not a promise that if you just find the right conceptual angle, the right way of thinking about it, the door will swing open. There is no door, there is no angle, there is only the gate and your willingness to stand at it without trying to get through until the getting through happens by itself. Wumen knew this from the inside. His own preface, his own commentary, his own verse for the first case, while though they are written from the other side of the gate, he spent years failing to pass. He describes in his commentary on Mu what the practice requires, and the image he uses is one of the most vivid, most honest, most bracingly physical images in all of this gentle literature. He says, concentrate the whole of yourself, all 360 bones and joints, all 84,000 pores, into this single word, Mu. Make of this word a mass. Hold it everywhere at once, day and night, not only on the cushion. And when you have done this long enough, what you are holding will become like a red-hot iron ball you have swallowed and cannot spit out. Not a pleasant image for a sleep recording. And yet, a red-hot iron ball you have swallowed and cannot spit out. Feel what that image does. It is not something you can put down. It is not something you can ignore. It is not something you can get bored of and come back to later. It is inside you, inescapable, demanding your full and continuous attention, not because you decided to give it attention, but because you cannot not. The iron ball in the belly, Mu, carried everywhere. This is what Wumen means by sitting with a koan. Not the pleasant, optional, intermittent kind of sitting with something, the way you might return to a nice piece of music between other activities. The iron ball kind. The you are now committed kind, and perhaps lying where you are right now with your own thoughts, doing what thoughts do. That image lands somewhere unexpected, because the thoughts that keep a mind racing at night are already, in a sense, an iron ball you have swallowed. They are already inescapable. They are already with you, whether you want them or not. The difference is only this: the racing thoughts are iron balls you did not choose, presenting themselves as urgent and solvable. The Koan Mu is an iron ball you take up voluntarily, knowing it will not be solved, because the point is not the solving. The point is what happens to a mind that holds something long enough to exhaust its habit of searching for the answer. But we are getting ahead of the evening. Let us come back to Wumen and his 48 cases, because there is more to say about the book itself, and about one case in particular that takes the question of logic and answers it before you have even asked. The Wumenguan is not the only great koan collection. There is an older one, denser and more elaborately literary, called the Bian Lu. In Japanese, the Hekigan Roku. In English, the Blue Cliff Record. 100 cases compiled with commentary by the Chinese master Yuanwu Keqin, who lived from 1063 to 1135, and based on verses composed by an earlier master, Suidu Chongxian, who lived from 980 to 1052. The Blue Cliff Record was published in 1128, a full century before the Wumenguan, and if you imagine the Wumenguan as a lean, austere gate, exactly 48 cases, brief commentaries, a single verse for each, then the Blue Cliff Record is the elaborately ornamented hall behind it, each case adorned with more poetry, more imagery, more interlocking layers of commentary. Scholars who have spent their careers inside the Koan literature describe it as the more demanding of the two, more poetically alive, and perhaps more bewildering. The Wumenguan is where students often begin. The Blue Cliff Record is where they spend much longer. But tonight, we are at the gate. We are with Wumen and his 48 cases and his barrier that has no door. And the case we have not yet arrived at, case that completes a particular question the evening has been holding, is one of the most famous in the West, though not for the reasons most people think. You have probably heard it before. You may have heard it so many times in so many different contexts that it has come to seem like a decoration, a charming, slightly absurd piece of Eastern mysticism that is trotted out whenever the conversation turns to things being inscrutable or unanswerable. Two hands clap and there is a sound. What is the sound of one hand? Or, as it is often phrased in English, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Here is the thing about this koan that almost no one who cites it thinks to mention. It was composed in the 18th century in Japan by a master named Hakuin Ekaku. He was born in 1686 and died in 1768, and he is arguably the single most important figure in the history of Rinzai Zen, the systematizer, the reformer, the man who brought the Koan curriculum into the form in which it is still practiced today, and he composed the sound of one hand. In Japanese, Sekishu no Onjo, the voice of one hand, not as a pinnacle of koan practice, not as the deepest mystery in the tradition. He composed it as a starting point, a beginner's koan, a way in. The classical Chinese collection, the Wumenguan and the Blue Cliff Record, do not contain it. It is Hakuin's invention, designed for a specific purpose, to give students in 18th century Japan a koan that would be immediately graspable as a question, something that would hook the thinking mind and begin the process of wearing it out. Mu requires some doctrinal background to fully feel the force of. The sound of one hand requires nothing except ears and the experience of clapping, both of which most people have. What is the sound of one hand? The thinking mind goes to work immediately. It is irresistible. You hear the question and something in you starts. Maybe silence, you think. Maybe the wind. Maybe the sound a hand makes moving through air. Maybe, and here the cleverness begins to elaborate, it is not about sound at all. It is about the impossibility of the question. It is a comment on dualism, on the way we depend on opposites, one hand against another, sound and silence, self and other. And all of that is thinking. All of that is the discursive mind doing what it does best, which is generating content, cycling through possibilities, offering theories, hoping one of them will be accepted. And here is what the tradition says about every one of those answers. No, not because they are wrong in the way that a wrong answer on a test is wrong, the wrong number, the wrong date, the wrong name. They are rejected because they are answers, because they come from the part of you that generates answers. And that part, however sophisticated, however creative, however genuinely insightful its content, is not the part that the koan is reaching for. The koan is reaching for whatever is behind and before that part, and that thing cannot be said. It can only be. And when it shows up in the private interview, the master knows there is no clever verbal answer to what is the sound of one hand. This is not mystical evasion, it is the design. Every answer you could speak is, by definition, a conceptual answer, and conceptual answers fail every koan because that is what koans are built to do. Make conceptual answers fail. The sound of one hand is not waiting for a better theory. It is waiting for you to stop theorizing. And this, again, is what makes it useful to a racing mind. A racing mind is, among other things, a theorizing mind. It is trying things out. It is running scenarios. It is checking whether this interpretation is more accurate than that one, whether this response to an imagined conversation is better than another one, whether the thing that happened today means what it seemed to mean, or might mean something worse, or something better, or something more complicated. The racing mind is always in the middle of generating content, always sure that if it runs the calculation just one more time, something will resolve. And along comes a koan and it says, "Here, try this one." Generate all the content you want. Every answer you produce will be wrong. Not wrong in a way that tells you which direction right is in, just wrong, returned, rejected, try again. Until the generating gives up. Until the engine stalls. Until the mind that was racing has used itself up on a problem designed to use it up. And in that moment of exhausted quiet, something. The tradition does not always say clearly what that something is, which is its own kind of honesty. It calls it kensho, seeing one's nature. It calls it a breakthrough. It is careful not to over-describe it, because describing it would give the thinking mind another thing to generate content about, a picture to chase rather than a state to arrive in. But it happens. It happened again and again across centuries of people sitting in monasteries and farmhouses and temple rooms, holding these impossible questions until the questions held them back. Hakuin knew this from the inside with unusual intimacy. He had gone through his own kensho experiences. Plural, he was careful to note, because a first glimpse is not the end, and the tradition of mapping kensho against satori, the initial seeing against the deeper settling, is partly a warning against stopping too soon. And out of his own decades of practice and teaching, he gave his students not only the sound of one hand as an entry point, but also one of the clearest, most honest articulations of the method's engine ever written. Great doubt, great awakening. Little doubt, little awakening. No doubt, no awakening. Read that slowly, or let it simply rest where it lands without trying to do anything with it. Great doubt, great awakening, the proportion holds across the whole practice. Whatever the doubt is, however large, however pressing, however inescapable, the awakening that is possible is in proportion to it. More doubt, not less, is what the practice needs. The doubt is not the obstacle. The doubt is the fuel. And for a mind lying awake in the dark, turning things over, unable to stop, unable to settle, that framing might be worth a moment of your attention. Because what we usually do with doubt, with the circling, with the looping, is try to get rid of it. We try to resolve it. We try to argue ourselves out of it, or we distract ourselves from it, or we wait for it to exhaust itself on its own. We treat it as a symptom. We treat it as something gone wrong. And sometimes it is, and the path through it is rest and mourning and things looking different. But Hakuin is saying something else here. He is saying that the doubt you are trying to escape is, if you are willing to hold it completely, not to solve it, not to resolve it, just to hold it the way you hold an iron ball, giving it your whole attention, precisely the raw material of a different relationship to the whole thing. The doubt mass, the great ball of doubt. In Chinese, Yituan, the image is not metaphorical in Hakuin's teaching. It is almost physical. The doubt builds and builds until it becomes a kind of pressure, a density, and when that density becomes total, when there is nothing else but the held question and the mind that is holding it, and the exhaustion of the mind that cannot get through, the whole thing can shatter. And what is on the other side of the shattering is, by definition, something the part that was working so hard could not have produced, because if it could have been produced by the part that was working, it would have been produced earlier. The shatter is the arrival of what was unavailable to the method. You do not need to chase this tonight. You are not here to shatter. You are here to rest. But the image of the doubt mass might be worth carrying lightly, the way you carry a smooth stone in a pocket, just there, just present, not urgent. The doubt you have been treating as an enemy, the looping and the turning over, and the inability to stop. What if it is just very dense? What if it has somewhere to go, and the going is not through cleverness or resolution, but through a kind of total, committed, iron ball holding until it becomes so complete that it breaks into something you did not know was there? That is Hakuin's answer, across 1,400 pages of commentary and verse and letters and painted scrolls. Hold it completely. Do not dilute it. Great doubt, great awakening. The racing mind is not broken. It is very close to something and it does not know. Now, take a breath. Notice where your body is in contact with what is beneath it. The weight of the blanket, if there is one. The slight warmth that has accumulated around you. The sound of whatever quiet surrounds you, or the particular texture of the sounds that are there. The settling of a building, the distance of traffic, the quality of silence in the room. You do not need to be anywhere else. The 48 cases will wait. Wumen's Gate is not going anywhere. Take a breath and let the body be heavy and come back when you are ready. There is one more thing about Hakuin and his system that is worth knowing, because it corrects one of the most persistent misunderstandings about koans that circulates in the parts of the world far from the tradition. And once it is corrected, the whole practice becomes something different. People often assume, and the assumption is understandable given how koans are presented in popular Western culture, that a koan is a one-time thing. You hear the question, you struggle with it, some flash of insight arrives, and then you are done. Enlightened, finished, changed. The moment of sudden awakening, dunwu in Chinese, is real within the tradition, and the stories of it are vivid. The master Ling Yun, who awakened on seeing peach blossoms in the spring, their color against the sky, something arriving in him that had not been there before. Xiangyan, who was sweeping a path in the garden and heard a pebble strike bamboo. One small sound, unintended, the stone traveling through air and meeting wood, and something in him that had been coiled and taught for years, suddenly not. These accounts come from the Jingde Chuandeng Lu, the transmission of the lamp compiled in 1004, and they belong to the hagiographic literature of the tradition, the records of transmission, which means they are precious and preserved, and also that they are not court transcripts, they are teaching stories. They are the tradition's way of pointing at something real by telling it as story. Whether each account is precisely biographical, the tradition does not claim. What it claims is that this is what awakening looks like when it comes. Sudden, triggered by something ordinary, unmistakable, not the product of effortful analysis. But even in the tradition's own telling, this is not the end of the path. Kensho, seeing one's nature, is an initial glimpse. It is not satori in the full sense. And in the Rinzai curriculum that Hakuin formalized, a student who has passed Mu has not finished with koans. They have begun. The curriculum reportedly involves a long sequence of koans, each one a further testing and deepening, because what was seen in the first breakthrough must be lived into, opened up, made part of the whole body of the practitioner, rather than a single memorable moment. Hundreds of koans, years of practice, curriculum that continues long after the first opening. And none of this is random, which is perhaps the most surprising thing about koan practice to people who encounter it as something mystical and improvisational and ungovernable. It is not. It is a structured training with a teacher with clear standards for what constitutes genuine insight and what does not, and with a very particular testing mechanism that has been in place for centuries. When a student in Rinzai practice believes they are ready to present their understanding of a koan, they go to the master in private. This meeting is called dokusan or sanzen, the individual interview, the private encounter. It is brief, it is direct, and it is not a verbal examination in the way a philosophy seminar is a verbal examination, where you are asked to explain your reasoning and your evidence and your logical chain. You do not explain yourself. You demonstrate. You show, by some action, some gesture, some way of being present in the room, that you are meeting the koan from the other side of it rather than looking at it from this side. The master accepts or does not. And if the master does not accept, you return to your cushion and to your iron ball and you continue. What makes this more than just one person's judgment is the Zhaozhou, the checking question. After a student appears to have passed a koan, the master probes further with additional questions, coming at the same case from different angles, testing whether the understanding is genuine or whether a clever student has found a way to produce the appearance of insight without the substance of it. This has happened. The tradition is not naive. Clever people are very good at producing what insight looks like, and the masters knew this and designed the testing accordingly. And beyond the Zhaozhou there is the yakugo, the capping phrase. A requirement that the student find from classical Chinese poetry a line that caps the insight, that crystallizes it, that says in the compressed language of verse what cannot be said in explanation. Victor Hori, a scholar who is also a trained Rinzai monk and who has spent his career documenting this in the work he calls Zen Koans, describes this aspect of the curriculum in detail. The student must know thousands of lines of verse and be able to match the right one to the koan's insight, not as a performance of memory, but as a demonstration that the insight has become alive enough in the student to recognize itself in another form, in a poem, in a line about autumn leaves or river water or a lamp going out. This is not mysticism without structure. This is a practice with accepted and rejected responses, with checking questions, with capping phrases, with a teacher who has been through the curriculum and can recognize from the inside what it looks like when something is real. It is rigorous. The reason it can look like free-form paradox from the outside is that the thing it is testing cannot be replicated by any standard of cleverness or performance. But the testing is real. The standards are real. When a master rejects an answer, the student knows it. When the master accepts, the student knows that too, and something in the long effort of holding changes. 48 cases in the Wumenguan, 100 in the Blue Cliff Record, a curriculum that goes on for years, and at the beginning of it, for many students in Hakuin's lineage, that beginner's question. 2 hands clap, and there is a sound. What is the sound of one hand? The most famous koan in the Western world, quoted at dinner parties and in philosophy classes and in advertisements for things that want to seem deep. And it is where beginners start. It is the training wheel. It is Hakuin's carefully designed on-ramp built in the 18th century for students who needed a way into the doubt mass that did not require prior doctrinal knowledge, which means, and there is something gently instructive in this, that if you have heard that question and felt frustrated by it, felt like it was making fun of you, felt like the point was to leave you baffled and tell you that is the teaching, felt like Zen was performing inscrutability for its own sake, you were being given the first koan. The frustration is right. The bafflement is right. The sense that no matter how you turn it, you cannot find the answer is exactly, precisely right. You were already inside the practice and you did not know it. The thinking mind was already doing its thing, cycling through possibilities, finding each one closed, looking for the angle that would unlock it. There is no angle. There is no unlock. There is only the holding and the iron ball and the question carried into everything. Washing dishes, walking to work, lying in the dark, until the question becomes so total that the you who was searching for the answer is no longer quite distinct from the question itself, and in that merging something happens that the tradition calls seeing one's nature, and which the tradition is careful not to over-describe. You do not need to over-describe it either, not tonight. Tonight it is enough to know that the frustration you felt when you heard the question about one hand or the slightly glazed quality that came over you when someone quoted it as if it should be obvious. That was not a sign you were missing something. That was the doorway. That was the gate without a door, doing what the gate without a door is supposed to do. And Wumen Huikai, compiling his 48 cases in 1228, writing his own preface to the collection, knew that people would stand at that gate for a long time. He did not offer a shortcut. He offered something better, confirmation that there was no shortcut, and that the standing itself was the practice, and that the gate was not a barrier to some other place, but a threshold into what you already were if you would stop trying to get there by procedure. The great way has no gate. 1,000 roads lead to it. And here you are on one of them, in the dark, and you have arrived further along it than you perhaps know. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Let it fill what needs filling and release what has been held. Notice where the body has settled, the places where you have softened without trying, the slight heaviness behind the eyes, the quiet that has begun to accumulate in the room and in you. There is no need to track the words. There is no examination. Nothing that was said needs to be kept.
It will have landed where it landed, and in the morning you will remember what you remember, and what you remember will be exactly what was meant for you tonight. The gate with no door is not waiting for you to solve it.
It is just there, steady and patient, the way old things are patient, the way a mountain is patient, or a river, or a question that has been held by 10,000 people across 1,000 years without losing any of its force. Mu is still mu. The sound of one hand is still waiting. The doubt mass of everyone who has ever held a koan and not been able to put it down is, in some sense, still building, still pressing toward the shattering that Hakuin described, still carrying the proportion he named: great doubt, great awakening; little doubt, little awakening; no doubt, no awakening. And somewhere in the space between holding and not holding, between the effort and the release, there is a place the thinking mind cannot reach by thinking. You are already resting near it. When you are ready, we will continue together. That place the thinking mind cannot reach by thinking. Let us stay near it a little longer and let us talk about why. Your mind right now, even in its quiet, is doing something quite specific. It is searching. That is what minds do. You hand them a worry and they turn it over, looking for the edge that fits, the solution that resolves, the answer that lets them stop. They are extraordinarily good at this. They have been practicing since you were very small, since the first time you learned that thinking your way through a problem made the problem go away. Find the word, find the shape, find the reason, and the discomfort of not knowing lifts. The mind learned this early, and it learned it well, and it has not stopped practicing since. A racing mind is not a broken mind. It is a problem-solving mind that has run out of problems its size, so it manufactures them. It loops because it is looking for the resolution that does not come, pressing on the same tender place again and again, the way a tongue finds a sawtooth, not from cruelty, from habit, from the deep, sincere belief that if it presses long enough and hard enough and at just the right angle, something will give. This is exactly the mechanism a koan is designed to engage, and then quietly and systematically to exhaust. Think of it this way: when you hand your mind a koan, when you give it the word mu, or the question of one hand, you are giving it what appears from the outside to be a problem. The mind accepts it. It turns it over. It reaches for what it knows: logic, memory, analogy, clever reasoning. It tries a conceptual answer and carries it to the master. The master looks at it and sets it aside. The mind tries another approach. That answer, too, is set aside. The mind goes faster, it tries harder, it reaches deeper into its bag of tools. Each answer comes back, each one fails. And here is the thing the mind in its urgency has not yet noticed. Not one of its answers was rejected because it was insufficiently clever. They were rejected because they were answers at all. The Koan was not asking for an answer. It was asking for something the answer-making machinery cannot produce. Something non-conceptual, something that comes not from adding thought to thought, but from the machinery stopping. The tradition calls what happens in the interim the doubt mass. The great ball of doubt in the Chinese Yituan. Hakuin Ekaku, writing in 18th century Japan, described it this way: great doubt, great awakening. Little doubt, little awakening. No doubt, no awakening. He meant something precise by this. He meant that the pressure of genuine, sustained, unresolved not knowing is not an obstacle to be managed. It is the engine. The doubt is not the problem to get through before the practice begins. The doubt is the practice. You hold the word mu and you do not know what it means, and you cannot solve it and you cannot set it down, and that sustained pressure, that building, wordless, formless, pressing against a door that has no handle, is exactly what is required. The racing mind meeting a koan encounters for perhaps the first time a problem it genuinely cannot solve by thinking harder. Every other problem in its repertoire has eventually yielded to enough cleverness. This one does not. And so the loop that usually powers a racing mind, try, check, retry, refine, repeat, begins to run without its usual reward. There is no click of resolution. There is no small release of having found the seam. There is only the word and the not knowing, and the return to the word, again and again. And in that repetition without payoff, something changes. The urgency of the problem-solving loop begins very gradually to lose its grip. Not because you have suppressed it or talked yourself out of it, but because it has run dry. It looked for the answer, and the answer was not there. It looked again, still not there. It went to every room in the house of thought, and every room was empty of what it was searching for. And attention, which had been scattering in every direction that the search sent it, begins, almost without your noticing, to collect itself around a single point, the word, the question, the one thing you are holding that cannot be resolved. This is what the tradition calls samadhi, the Sanskrit word meaning something like complete, undivided absorption. Not a trance, not an absence. More like the quality of attention a craftsperson gives a very fine piece of work when everything else falls away. The koan, because it refuses every conceptual exit, holds attention in the way nothing else quite manages to hold it, not by being pleasant or by being exciting, but by being irreducibly present and unanswerable. The mind stops scattering because there is nowhere useful to scatter to. Wumen's instruction, remember, was not gentle. Swallow the iron ball. You cannot spit it out. Concentrate the whole body, every joint, every pore, into this single word. Carry it day and night. Let inside and outside become one. This is not a relaxation technique in any familiar sense, but it functions as one. Because when inside and outside become one, when the separation between you, who are trying to solve it, and the word being investigated collapses, the mind is no longer split between its usual dozen conversations. It is singular. It is, for perhaps the first time in a long while, actually still. Let us look at two of the cases that show what this pointing to stillness looks like in practice. The seventh case of the Wumenguan. A monk arrives at the monastery. He has just entered. He is new, eager, carrying the weight of all the questions a new student carries. He goes to Zhaozhou, the same master, the same Tang-dynasty teacher, from the 8th and 9th centuries who answered Mu, and he says, "I have just entered the monastery. Please teach me." Zhaozhou asks, "Have you eaten your rice porridge?" "Yes," the monk says. "Then wash your bowl." The monk, it is recorded, gained insight. Now, nothing in that exchange is mystical in the surface sense. There is no paradox stated, no logical contradiction, no scandalous contradiction of doctrine. Zhaozhou says, "You ate, therefore do the thing that follows from having eaten. Wash your bowl." And yet this is a koan that has stopped practitioners in their tracks for 12 centuries, because it is pointing at something that sounds obvious and is, in practice, extraordinarily rare. Wash your bowl. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, not as a step towards something else. Wash your bowl because you have used it and it is in front of you, and this is the next thing. The teaching underneath the teaching is this. The mind that is always planning for the next thing, always resolving the last thing, always reaching behind or ahead, that mind is never where the bowl is. It is somewhere else. And the somewhere else is where the racing begins. When Zhaozhou says, "Wash your bowl," he is not giving instructions about dishes. He is pointing at a quality of attention so complete and ordinary and present that there is nothing left to race toward. The bowl is the bowl. The hot water is the hot water. The hands are the hands. This. To really hear it, not as a sentence but as a demonstration, is to feel the mind suddenly land like a bird that has been circling a long time and finds, unexpectedly, the branch it was looking for all along. There is another case that works in a similar direction, though it looks very different on the surface. This is case 37. A student asks Zhaozhou, and notice how often it is Zhaozhou, how often this one Tang-dynasty master keeps appearing in these cases, which is one of the reasons scholars rank him among the most significant figures in Chan literature. The student asks, "What is the meaning of bodhidharmas coming from the West?" This is one of the standard questions in the Koan collections, a kind of shorthand for the deepest possible question. What is the essence of Zen? What is the heart of the whole thing? Why does any of this matter? If you could say the meaning of it all in one phrase, what would it be? Zhaozhou says, "The cypress tree in the garden, nothing more." Not an explanation, not a metaphor, unpacked, not a teaching elaborated, just that tree. The one you can see from where you are sitting, the one that has been growing quietly while you were formulating your question. The one that did not need to know the essence of anything in order to go on being exactly what it is. The cypress tree in the garden is, in one sense, the Koan's way of saying, you are looking in the wrong direction. The meaning you are searching for is not hidden behind language or behind doctrine or behind a sufficiently clever formulation. It is here, growing in the dirt, in the light, in the ordinary moment you are standing inside without quite seeing it. And again, the mind that receives this properly, not as a riddle solved, but as a finger pointing at something genuinely present, arrives somewhere it has not been in a while. Somewhere very quiet. Somewhere that does not need an answer because it is not posing a question. Not all koans are this gentle. That is worth saying honestly. There is a case in the Wumenguan, case 14, attributed to the master Nanquan, that is among the most disturbing in the collection. It involves the killing of a cat. The details do not need to be lingered on here. It is enough to say that the case is told as a teaching about what happens when a community of monks becomes caught in abstract argument while the living moment passes. Nanquan cuts through the argument, abruptly, shockingly, without the gentleness of the cypress tree or the ordinariness of the washed bowl. His student Zhaozhou, hearing about it later, puts his sandals on his head and walks out. Koan says, if you had been there, the cat would have been saved. Scholars and practitioners have argued about this case for centuries. Some read it as a parable about the cost of conceptual clinging. Some read it as a deliberate provocation to shake the student out of the expectation that Zen teaching will always be comfortable. Some find it troubling in ways that resist resolution. That difficulty, that refusal to settle into a clean teaching, may itself be part of the point. Not every koan is warm. The tradition does not ask you to find it warm, it asks you to hold it. Here it is worth pausing to say something honest about where koan practice fits inside Zen as a whole, because Zen is not one thing, and koans are not the only path through it. The school most strongly associated with koan training is the Rinzai school, whose Japanese lineage traces through teachers going back to the Chinese Linji school, Linji, pronounced roughly Linji, being the Chinese name for what became Rinzai in Japan. Within Rinzai, the Koan curriculum was systematized most fully by Hakuin Ekaku, who lived from 1686 to 1768, and who produced not only the iron ball instruction and the great doubt formulation, but also a long, graded sequence of hundreds of koans through which a student might pass over many years. This is important. Kensho, the initial seeing of one's nature, is in Hakuin's system not the end, but a beginning. The Koan curriculum continues. Dozens of koans, then hundreds, each tested in the private interview, each requiring not a verbal answer, but a demonstration. Something shown, something enacted, something that arrives from a place below clever reasoning. There is another school, equally real and equally honored, that looks at koan practice with something between skepticism and principled disagreement. This is the Soto school, which traces back through the Caodong lineage in China, and whose founding figure in Japan is Dogen, who lived from 1200 to 1253. Dogen is one of the most profound writers in the history of Buddhism. His collected essays, the Shobogenzo, are extraordinarily dense and rewarding even in translation, and his relationship to koans is complicated. He knew the koan literature thoroughly. He wrote about many of the cases, but he was cautious about the koana's puzzle model, the model that treats realization as a problem to be cracked, and then the cracking as the proof that you have arrived. For Dogen, realization is not a goal you are moving toward. It is something that is always already present in the act of sincere practice. Sitting in Zazen, he famously taught, is not a means to awakening. It is awakening expressing itself. This approach is sometimes called shikantaza, a Japanese phrase meaning something like just this sitting, not sitting in order to get somewhere, not sitting to solve anything, sitting as the full expression of what you already, at depth, are. The difference between the Rinzai and Soto approaches is a genuine difference, not just a stylistic one, and it has been debated inside Zen for centuries. It is worth knowing that when someone says koans quiet the mind, they are speaking from within one tradition, and that another tradition within the same house looks at that framing and says, perhaps the problem is the search itself. Perhaps the door you are looking for opens from the inside and has always been open. Both views are honest. Both are offered here without judgment. And then there is the history of how koans came to the West, which is its own kind of story. Daisetsu Teitaro Suzuki, known as D.T. Suzuki, was born in 1870 and lived until 1966. And it is not too much to say that for most people in Europe and North America who encountered Zen in the 20th century, they encountered it first through his English writing. His books from the 1920s through the 1950s brought the koan into Western conversations about art, psychology, philosophy, and culture. He described the sudden awakening, the irrational paradox, the liberation from logic. He made Zen vivid and strange and appealing in exactly the way that captured the imagination of mid-century Western readers who were beginning to sense that something in their own intellectual tradition was missing. The debt to Suzuki is real. He opened a door. But scholars who came after him, Stephen Heine, Dale Wright, Victor Sogen-Hori, who trained as a Rinzai monk and then became an academic, have pointed out that his presentation was also, in places, romanticized. He emphasized the sudden flash, the irrational leap, the mystical break from ordinary consciousness, in ways that underplayed the long, disciplined, curricularized nature of actual koan training. A student in a Rinzai monastery sits for years, hundreds of koans, private interviews, twice a day during intensive retreat, checking questions, capping phrases drawn from classical Chinese poetry, which the student must find and offer as evidence of genuine insight. And this is not a romantic flash, it is work, long, patient, structured work that looks from the outside like sitting still. The popular image of the koan, a charming nonsense riddle designed to blow your mind, with no real answer, no real criterion, just a shrug and a mystical smile, owes something to Suzuki and a great deal to the Western imagination that received him and made of him what it needed at the time. The actual practice is more rigorous and more interesting than the myth suggests. And the actual practice is, for most people in most lives, not available in its full traditional form. There are no Rinzai masters in most cities. The intensive retreat, the dokusan interview twice a day, the decades of curriculum. These are extraordinary gifts that are not within reach of everyone who lies awake at night with a racing mind. But the invitation that the koan extends does not require the full apparatus to be felt. You do not need a master. You do not need a curriculum. You do not need to be a Buddhist or to understand the Wumenguan or to know the difference between the Rinzai and Soto schools. You need only this: a willingness to hold something unresolved without trying to force it to resolve. Here is the practice, offered not as a task, but as a way of being, a possibility you might carry into the rest of this night. Pick one word or one question. It does not need to be mu, though you are welcome to use mu. It can be as simple as this: what is this? Not what is this thought, not what is the cause of this thought, not how do I stop this thought. Just what is this? The word or question itself does not matter very much. What matters is that you hold it lightly, the way you hold something you are looking at in low light, not gripping it so hard that you can't see it, not letting it go so completely that it drifts. When another thought arrives, and another thought will arrive, that is what thoughts do, that is not a failure. You notice it and you return. Not with irritation, not with the feeling of starting over, not with the sense that the thought was an intrusion you should have prevented. You simply return the word, the question, this. This returning is the practice. The returning is not a defeat. The returning is precisely what is asked. Wumen said, concentrate the whole body into this single word. He did not say succeed at concentrating the whole body. He said, do this, turn in this direction. When you have drifted, turn again. The turning is the thing. And what happens over time, over repetitions of the return, not necessarily tonight, not necessarily in one sitting, but over honest and patient practice, is the thing the tradition has been pointing at for 1200 years. The urgency of the searching loosens. Not because you have decided to relax, not because you have talked yourself into a different state, but because the loop that was running, the looking, the checking, the not finding, the looking again, has been given something it cannot solve on those terms, and has very gradually let go of the terms. Attention settles. The room is still there. The breath is still there. The question is still there, quiet and present, not demanding anything. The iron ball Wumen described is still in the chest, but somewhere in the holding of it, it has cooled a little, and the not being able to spit it out, which felt at first like a kind of trap, reveals itself to be something different, a center, a place to return to, a point around which the usual scatter of thought has nothing to do and so, quietly, stops. You do not arrive somewhere new, you arrive here. And here is enough. Tonight you do not need to achieve anything with this. You do not need to have a breakthrough. You do not need to understand Mu or find the sound of one hand or feel your thought loop shatter in the way Hakuin described. Those things belong to a long, patient path, and whether that path calls to you or not is entirely your own matter. What the Koan offers tonight, what this tradition, in its long and careful way, has found, is something much simpler, a single point of return, a word or a question that sits in the middle of the spinning and does not spin, and the instruction to come back to it again and again and again, not as a performance of discipline, but as an act of ordinary, repeated, gentle care toward the mind that is with you in this bed, in this dark, in this particular night. Let us sit here for a moment before we go. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the air arrive without your doing very much to help it. Let the body remember what it already knows about resting, the softening it moves toward when it is permitted to, the particular weight of limbs that are done with carrying. There is nothing to figure out tonight. There is nothing that requires your problem-solving machinery right now. Let it rest. Whatever it was working on when you lay down, it will still be there in the morning, and it will be there whether or not you spent the night rehearsing it. You have done what today required. And now this. We have covered a long distance tonight, though we have not moved. We began with an iron ball. I swallow it, Wumen said. Carry it day and night. Let it grow until inside and outside become one. That image is the teacher's own description of what it means to hold a koan. Not comfortably, not as a pleasant puzzle, as something that has entered you and will not be spat out until it has done what it came to do. We met a monk asking Zhaozhou in the Tang-dynasty whether a dog has Buddha nature, and we heard the master say mu, nothing, no, not, and we understood why that single syllable split 12 centuries of practice open, because it said the thing doctrine said could not be said, because it refused the frame of the question, because no amount of thinking your way around it will tell you what it means, and yet it means something very precise, and that meaning is available to anyone who holds it long enough. We held the question of one hand. Hakuin's beginning Koan, the most famous one in the West, a deliberate starter's tool, offered gently to people who are at the beginning of something they cannot yet name, and which has no clever verbal answer because the answer was never verbal. We stood in front of a gateless gate, a barrier with no door, a wall with 1,000 roads leading to it, a collection of 48 cases compiled by Wumen Huikai in 1228, each case a kind of test and also a kind of gift, each one a small model of the thing that cannot be modeled. We watched a monk wash his bowl and felt perhaps a little of what Zhaozhou was pointing at, the ordinary moment, fully inhabited, which turns out to be the only extraordinary thing. We stood near a cypress tree in a garden and heard it offered as the answer to the deepest question anyone thought to ask. We learned that the doubt itself, the great ball of doubt pressing and building and refusing to break, is the engine. That the doubt you have been carrying, the spinning, the looping, the returning to the same unanswered place again and again, is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is the shape of a mind that is close to something it has not yet named. You do not need to remember any of this. If one thing stayed, one image, one phrase, One small shift in how the racing mind looks to you in the dark. Let that be enough. The rest has landed where it landed, and it will surface when it is ready. The way things do when you are not pressing on them. The gate with no door is patient. Mu is not going anywhere. The sound of one hand is still somewhere sounding, and you, in this bed, in this particular late hour, with whatever you were carrying when you arrived here tonight, you are already, in some sense that the tradition has been pointing at across 12 centuries, exactly where you need to be. Sleep well. Welcome to Relaxing Subjects, and thank you for joining us tonight. Subject closed for the night, let it all relax away. There is a teaching that sits underneath all of the cases we have moved through tonight, and it is this. The racing mind is a mind that believes it has a problem it can solve. Think about that for a moment. When thought loops in the dark, it is not random noise. It is the mind doing what it was built to do, identifying a problem, reaching toward it, turning it over, trying one approach and then another, circling back when the approach fails. The mind is working. It is diligent. It means well. It has simply been handed something it cannot finish, and it does not know how to put it down. A Koan works on the racing mind not by soothing it, but by starving it. When you hold a Koan, and when you carry Mu, or the sound of one hand, or the question of what face you had before your parents were born, you are giving the thinking mind a problem it cannot solve by thinking. And the thinking mind will try. Of course it will. It will come at the Koan from one angle and then another. It will propose answers. Each answer will collapse. It will propose more answers. Those will collapse too. And gradually, after enough failing, something shifts. The loop has nothing left to chase. Attention, which had been scattering itself across 100 anxious branches, falls inward. It rests on a single point, not because it was forced to rest, because the machinery that was keeping it scattered has run out of fuel. The tradition calls this the beginning of samadhi, a word that means, in its simplest sense, a mind that has gathered itself into one place. The Rinzai lineage does not describe it as relaxation exactly. It describes it as the pressure of the doubt mass becoming so complete, so total, that the ordinary architecture of the thinking self temporarily loses its grip. What remains, they say, is something cleaner, something that was always there underneath the circling. You do not need to believe that. It is enough for tonight to notice the principle. A mind given something it cannot solve by cleverness will, if it stays long enough with the unsolvable thing, eventually stop reaching for cleverness. And the reaching is what tires us. The reaching is what keeps the light on when the body wants to rest. Zhaozhou knew this. His answers were not answers. They were walls, gently placed, designed to turn thought back toward itself until thought loosened its own hold. "Wash your bowl," he said. And the monk did not hear instructions about dishwashing. He heard something pointing at the moment right in front of him, the water, the weight of the bowl in his hands, the uncomplicated reality of the task. The mind that asks for teaching is often a mind that wants to be carried away from the present into some other, more elevated place. Zhaozhou pointed it straight back. Here, this bowl, this water, this. The cypress tree in the garden was the same gesture. What is the meaning behind everything? Behind the tradition, behind the practice, behind the whole long question of awakening? The cypress tree, not a concept, not an abstraction. The tree, standing in the garden in the ordinary afternoon light, being exactly what it is without commentary. Both of these cases belong to a gentler register of Koan, the kind that returns you to simplicity rather than driving you to an edge. The tradition knows, though, that not all Koans are gentle. Case 14 of the Wumenguan, the case of Nanquan and the cat, is the kind of teaching that is deliberately disturbing, framed as a parable of how fiercely clinging to dualistic thinking can be cut. It is a difficult case, not easy to hold, and scholars have spent centuries writing around its edges. It is offered here only to name honestly that the tradition does not traffic solely in warmth. Some koans are meant to unsettle, to break the student's confidence in knowing what the right thing is, to demonstrate that the teacher's authority does not come from niceness. The koan curriculum is precise, and the masters who built it were not soft. Hakuin Ekaku was not soft. He described the practice as swallowing something that burns, something you cannot put down or spit out. That is not the language of comfort. It is the language of total commitment. The doubt mass is not a pleasant thing to carry, and yet it is offered tonight because the principle at the center holds even in softer hands. You do not need a master, a cushion, a monastery, or a formal koan to use the underlying logic. The insight is transferable. Pick one word, one question. Something simple enough to hold and strange enough that it doesn't resolve on its own, a sound, a fragment, even the word mu itself, carried as sound rather than meaning. When thought begins its circling tonight, return to the word, not to analyze it, not to solve it, simply to return. When the next thought comes, return again and again. The looping will lose energy. The reaching will slow, not because you forced it to, because you gave it something it could not consume. That is the practice for tonight. A way of being, not a task. The Soto tradition, in the voice of Dogen, who lived and taught in Japan in the first half of the 13th century, who believed that sitting itself was the expression of awakening, not a means toward it, would say something a little different. Dogen's critique of Koana's puzzle was principled and persistent. He did not think realization was something to be cracked open, a locked door to force. He thought it was already here, in the sitting, in the breath, in the ordinary moment fully received. Shikantaza, just sitting, was his teaching. No koan to wrestle, no goal to reach, only this, exactly as it is. Both of these views are honestly held within the same broad tradition by serious practitioners over many centuries. The Rinzai lineage builds the doubt mass and drives it toward a breaking point. The Soto lineage sits quietly and trusts the sitting. D.T. Suzuki, writing in English through the middle decades of the 20th century, brought the Rinzai image of sudden, dramatic kensho to Western readers, the flash of insight, the dramatic breakthrough. And that is largely the koan that the Western imagination inherited. Scholars have noted with some care that his presentation was selective. The fuller picture includes Dogen's quieter way, the graded curriculum of hundreds of cases worked over years, the checking questions and capping phrases of the private interview, the long-practiced discipline behind what looked like sudden illumination. Neither version promises ease. Both point from different directions at the same thing. The ordinary mind, the one that loops and races and reaches and worries, is not your deepest nature. There is something underneath it that the tradition has been gesturing toward patiently for 12 centuries. And the koan, in its strange, resistant way, is one of the instruments the tradition built to let you feel, however briefly, what it is like when the looping stops. Take a slow, deep breath now. Let the body settle a little further into wherever it is resting. You do not need to remember the names, the cases, the dates, the schools. None of that needs to travel with you into sleep. What can travel, if anything does, is something smaller and quieter. A sense that the mind that races is not the only mind you have, that underneath the circling there is something that is not circling, that Zhaozhou was not confused when he contradicted himself. That Wumen's Gate, the one with no door, is not a cruel joke, but a generous one. that the thing you were waiting to be let through was never actually locked. We have moved through a good deal of ground together tonight. We have met the word that cannot be answered, the one that a Tang-dynasty master aimed like a finger at the moon and sent back down the centuries to land here, in this quiet room, in this particular hour. We have swallowed, in imagination at least, the red-hot iron ball that cannot be spit out. We have heard the sound of one hand, not as a riddle, but as a long, patient invitation. We watched a monk wash his bowl and felt perhaps a little of what Zhaozhou was pointing at, the ordinary moment, fully inhabited, which turns out to be the only extraordinary thing. We stood near a cypress tree in a garden and heard it offered as the answer to the deepest question anyone thought to ask. We learned that the doubt itself, the great ball of doubt pressing and building and refusing to break, is the engine. That the doubt you have been carrying, the spinning, the looping, the returning to the same unanswered place again and again, is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is the shape of a mind that is close to something it has not yet named. You do not need to remember any of this. If one thing stayed, one image, one phrase, one small shift in how the racing mind looks to you in the dark, let that be enough. The rest has landed where it landed, and it will surface when it is ready. The way things do when you are not pressing on them. The gate with no door is patient. Mu is not going anywhere. The sound of one hand is still somewhere sounding, and you, in this bed, in this particular late hour, with whatever you were carrying when you arrived here tonight, you are already, in some sense that the tradition has been pointing at across 12 centuries, exactly where you need to be. Sleep well. Welcome to Relaxing Subjects, and thank you for joining us tonight. Subject closed for the night. Let it all relax away.